Chapter 3. In the past, his lord had been reduced to a laughingstock with no incense, no temple, and no believers. Meanwhile, his two attendants had crossed heavenly tribulations and ascended to become great martial gods overseeing a region. This kind of situation, no one could avoid thinking about it. If Xie Lian had to choose between Feng Xian and Mu Qing, which made him feel more embarrassed, he would say, both are fine. But if others were to choose, would they want to see Xie Lian and Feng Xian fight each other, or would they want to see Xie Lian and Mu Qing fight each other? Everyone had their own tastes. After all, they both had sufficient reasons to fight each other, so it was hard to decide who was better. Therefore, no one responded to Feng Xian for a long time. He didn't even say a word and directly hit himself. Everyone was extremely disappointed. Xie Lian ended the matter and hit himself a few more times. I also didn't expect things to become like this. It wasn't intentional, but I've caused trouble for everyone. Mu Qing coldly said, "Oh, that really is too much of a coincidence." What a coincidence. Xie Lian also felt that it really was too much of a coincidence. How could he just happen to smash Mu Qing and tear down Feng Xian? To others, it simply looked like he was deliberately taking revenge. But reality was like this. He was the kind of person who, if he had to choose 1 cup of wine from 1,000 cups to poison, would definitely choose the poison wine no matter what. But no matter what other people thought in their hearts, you couldn't do anything about it. Xie Lian could only say, "I will do my best to repair everyone's golden palace and other losses. I hope you can give me a bit of time." Although it was obvious that Mu Qing still wanted to continue blowing cold air, his golden palace wasn't damaged and the bell that had smashed him had been chopped by him. If he continued to be overbearing, he would appear unsightly and lose his status. Thus, he also hit himself and didn't say anything. When Xie Lian saw that the mess had already left, he also hurriedly ran away. That he was still seriously pondering how to obtain these 8.88 million merit points. The next day, Ling Wen invited him to Ling Wen's treasure hall. Ling Wen was a heavenly official in charge of human affairs. She was in charge of human affairs and had a meteoric rise. The entire treasure hall, from the ground to the ceiling, was filled with official documents and scrolls. That scene was extremely shocking and horrifying. As Xie Lian walked, every heavenly official that came out of Ling Wen Palace Hall was carrying documents that were taller than a person. Their faces were deathly pale, and if it wasn't a look of collapse, then it was a look of numbness. After entering the main hall, Ling Wen turned around and went straight to the point. "Your Highness, the Emperor has something to ask of you. Are you willing to lend him a hand?" There were many perfected immortals and middle immortals in the heavenly realm, but only one of them could be called the Emperor. If he wanted to do something, he would never beg others for help. Thus, Xie Lian was startled for a moment before asking, "What is it?" Ling Wen passed him a scroll and said, "Recently, there has been a group of big believers frequently praying for blessings in the north. I think it's not very peaceful." The so-called great believers generally referred to 3 types of people. The first type were rich people who paid money to burn incense, perform rituals, and build temples. The second type were preachers who could preach to others. The third type were people who completely carried out their beliefs in body and mind. Among them, the first type was the most common. The wealthier the person was, the more they feared the supernatural, and there were as many rich people in the world as there were carps in the river. The third type was the least, because if one could really do this, then that person's realm must be very high, and he would not be far from ascending. The people mentioned here were clearly the first type of people. Of Ling Wen said, "The Emperor can't attend to the north at the moment. If you are willing to go in his place, when the time comes, no matter how much merit and virtue this group of great believers offers, I will offer it all to your altar. What do you think?" Xie Lian received the scroll with both hands and said, "Many thanks." This was clearly Junwu helping him out, yet he was asking him if he was willing to help him out. How could Xie Lian not be able to see that? However, he was also unable to find a better word to express what he was thinking in his heart. Ling Wen said, I'm only responsible for handling matters. If you want to thank someone, then wait for the emperor to return. You can thank him yourself. Oh right, do you need me to lend you any talisman? Xia Lian said, no need. Even if you give me a talisman, I won't have any strength when I go down, and I won't be able to use it. Xia Lian had been struck down twice, and he had lost all of his spiritual power. It was still alright if he was in the heaven realm. The heaven realm was a place where all the celestial palaces gathered. The spiritual energy there was abundant and endless. He could casually grasp it and use it for himself. However, once he returned to the mortal world, he would be a fool. If he wanted to fight, he could only make do with borrowing some spiritual energy from others. Ling Wen pondered for a moment, then said, then it would be best to borrow a few military officials to lend you a helping hand. The current marshal. Gods either didn't recognize him or didn't like him. Xia Lian was still clear on this point. He said, there's no need. You won't be able to borrow people. Ling Wen, however, had her own considerations. She said, I'll try. It didn't make a difference whether she tried or not. Xia Lian neither agreed nor objected, so he let her try. Thus, Ling Wen entered the spiritual array. In a clear voice, she said, everyone, the emperor has important matters to attend to in the north and is in urgent need of manpower. Which martial God's Highness can lend 2 military officials from their palace? Just as she finished speaking, Mu Qing's voice lightly floated over. I heard that the emperor isn't in the north right now. I'm afraid he's borrowing them for His Highness the Crown Prince. Xia Lian thought to himself, are you guarding the spiritual array all day long? Ling Wen thought the same thing as him. In her heart, she wanted to slap Mu Qing, who was obstructing her work, out of the array. With a smile, she said, Xianzhen, how come I keep seeing you in the array these past 2 days? It seems like you've been stealing half a day of leisure. Recently? Congratulations, congratulations. Mu Qing indifferently said, my hand is injured. I'm recuperating. In their hearts, the various heavenly officials said, in the past, that hand of yours could easily split mountains and seas. What can it do to you if it's just a stupid clock? Ling Wen wanted to first trick 2 people into coming over to work for her. Not only did Mu Qing guess it, but he also said it out loud. This time, they definitely wouldn't be able to find anyone. Sure enough, after a while, no one disturbed them. Xia Lian also didn't feel anything was wrong. He said to her, you see, I said I can't borrow people. Ling Wen said, if Xianzhen didn't say anything, I can borrow people. Xia Lian smiled and said, those words of yours are like holding a pipa and covering half of your face. Looking at the flowers in the fog gives 3 points of beauty. People think you're working for the emperor, so of course you can ask them to come. But if they come and find out you're working with me, I'm afraid they'll cause a ruckus. How can we work together? In any case, I'm used to being alone. I don't see any missing arms or legs, so I'll leave it at that. I'll have to trouble you. I'll be leaving now. Ling Wen also couldn't do anything else. Cupping her hands, she said, all right. I wish your highness a smooth journey. Heavenly official's blessing. Xia Lian replied, nothing is taboo. Waving his hand, he confidently left. 3 days later, in the human world, in the north on the side of the main road, there was a small tea and pastries shop. The shop wasn't big, and the staff was simple. However, the scenery was good. There were mountains, rivers, people, and a city. There was everything, not much. Not much, just right. In this scenery, if they were to meet here, it would definitely become a wonderful memory. The tea sommelier in the shop was extremely idle. When there weren't any customers, he would bring over a stool and sit at the entrance. He would look at the mountains, the rivers, the people, and the city, happily watching. In the distance, he saw a white-clothed Taoist walking over. His entire body was covered in dust, as if he had walked for a long time. As he walked closer, he brushed past the small shop. Suddenly, he stopped and slowly walked back. Holding up his bamboo hat, he raised his head and glanced at the liquor label. With a smile, he said, "Encounter small shop, what an interesting name." Although this person looked a little tired, his expression was all smiles. Seeing him, the two corners of people's mouths couldn't help but curve upwards. He then asked, "Excuse me, may I ask if Mount Yujun is nearby?" The tea sommelier pointed him in the direction and said, "It's in this area." This person let out a breath. In the end, he didn't spit out his soul. In his heart, he said, "I've finally arrived." It was Xia Lian. When he left the immortal capital that day, he had originally decided on the place where he would descend to the mortal world. He was going to land near Mount Yujun. Who knew that when he left the immortal capital and jumped down, his sleeve would get caught by a cloud? Yes, he got caught by a cloud. He didn't know how he got caught. In any case, he rolled in the sky and didn't know where he was after rolling down. After walking for 3 days, he finally arrived at the place where he had originally planned to land. For a moment, he was filled with emotions. After entering the shop, Xiao Lian picked a table by the window and asked for tea and snacks. When he finally sat down with great difficulty, he suddenly heard the sound of crying and gongs and drums being beaten. He looked towards the main street and saw a group of men, women, old, and young escorting a large red bridal sedan, walking on the main road. This procession gave off a very strange atmosphere. At first glance, it looked like a wedding procession. However, upon closer inspection, the expressions on these people's faces were solemn, sorrowful, angry, and fearful. The only thing missing was joy. No matter what, it didn't look like they were celebrating a happy occasion. Yet, they were all dressed in red and flowers, blowing and playing drums. This situation was extremely strange. The tea sommelier held a copper teapot high in the air and nodded. He also saw this scene, but he only shook his head and went down. Xiao Lian watched as the strange procession went far away. After pondering for a moment, he was about to take out the scroll that Ling Wen had given him and read it again when he suddenly felt a dazzling object flash past. He raised his head and saw a silver butterfly fly past his eyes. The silver butterfly was sparkling and translucent. As it flew through the air, it left behind a resplendent trail. Xiao Lian couldn't help but extend his hand towards it. This silver butterfly was very intelligent. Not only was it not startled, but it also stayed on his fingertips. Its wings flickered, extremely beautiful and serene. Under the sunlight, it seemed like an illusion that would shatter at the touch of his hand. Not long after, it flew away. Xiao Lian waved his hand at it as a farewell. When he turned his head, he saw that there were 2 more people sitting at his table. There were 4 sides to the table. These 2 people sat on the left and right of the table, each occupying a side. On both sides were teenagers around 18 or 19 years old. The one on the left was taller. His brows were deep and bright, and his gaze carried a hint of arrogance and unruliness. The one on the right was extremely white. He was delicate and pretty, but his expression was a bit too cold and indifferent. It was as if he wasn't very happy in his heart. In reality, both of their expressions weren't very good. Xiao Lian blinked his eyes and asked, "You two are?" The one on the left replied, "Nan Feng." The one on the right replied, "Fu Yao." Xiao Lian thought to himself, "I'm not asking for your names." At this moment, Ling Wen suddenly transmitted her voice over. She said, "Your Highness, there are 2 little military officials from the Central Heaven Court who are willing to come forward and assist. They have already gone down to look for you. They should have arrived by now." The so-called Central Heaven Court was naturally the opposite of the Upper Heaven Court. The heavenly officials of heaven could be simply and crudely divided into 2 categories, those who had ascended and those who hadn't. Those who had ascended to the Heaven Court were all heavenly officials who relied on their own abilities to ascend. In the entire heaven realm, there were no more than 100 of them, and they were all extremely precious. As for those in the Central Heaven Court, they were appointed. Strictly speaking, their full name should be Tong Heavenly Official. However, when people called them that, they would often omit the word donghua. In that case, there were upper heaven court and central heaven court, but were there lower heaven court? There weren't. In fact, when Xia Lian first ascended, there really were. At that time, they were still divided into upper heaven court and lower heaven court. However, later on, everyone discovered a problem. When they introduced themselves, saying, "I'm so-and-so from the lower heaven court," was really unpleasant to hear. Having the word lower made them feel especially inferior. It must be known that among them, there was no lack of outstanding people with outstanding talents and powerful spiritual power. They were only one heavenly tribulation away from becoming a true heavenly official. Who knew when that day would come? Thus, someone suggested changing the word to "I'm so-and-so from the central heaven court." This sounded much better. Although in reality, they all had the same meaning. In short, after changing it, Xia Lian couldn't get used to it for a while. Xia Lian looked at these two little military officials. Their expressions were one uglier than the other, and they didn't look like they were willing to come and help at all. Xia Lian couldn't help but ask, "Lingwen, I don't think they're here to help me. It's more like they're here to take my dog head. Don't drag them over." Unfortunately, his words didn't seem to reach them. He also couldn't hear Lingwen's voice in his ears. Presumably, they had left the immortal capital for too long, and their spiritual power had been exhausted. Xia Lian had no choice but to first smile at the two little military officials and say, "Nanfeng and Fu Yao, right? Since you're willing to come and help, I thank you in advance." The two of them only nodded their heads. They had quite an imposing manner, and it seemed like they were definitely under the command of the illustrious martial god. Xia Lian had the tea sommelier add 2 more cups. Picking up the teacup, he scraped the tea leaves and casually asked, "Which royal highness are you under?" Nanfeng replied, "Nanyang Palace Hall." Fuyao replied, "Xianzhen Palace Hall." This was truly frightening. Xia Lian swallowed a mouthful of tea and said, "Did your family's general ask you to come over?" The two of them replied, "Our family's general doesn't know that I've come." Xia Lian thought for a moment, then said, "Then, do you know who I am?" If these two little military officials were carelessly tricked by Lingwen and helped him, then when they returned, they would be scolded by their own general. That wouldn't be worth it. Nanfeng replied, "You're His Highness the Crown Prince." Fu Yao replied, "You're the righteous path of the human world. You're the center of the world." Xia Lian choked for a moment, then asked Nanfeng with uncertainty, "Did he just roll his eyes?" Nanfeng replied, "Yes. Tell him to scram." Nanyang and Xianzhen didn't have a good relationship. This wasn't a secret, so when Xia Lian heard about it, he wasn't all that surprised. This was because the relationship between Feng Xian and Mu Qing wasn't that good in the past. It was just that at that time, he was the master and they were the subordinates. When the crown prince said that they shouldn't quarrel and that they should be good friends, everyone endured and didn't turn hostile. If they were truly unhappy, they would at most use words to stab the other party. But now, they no longer needed to be hypocritical. Therefore, even the believers of the two heavenly officials in the southeast and southwest didn't think much of each other. Nanyang Palace Hall and Xianzhen Palace Hall were even more hostile towards each other all year round. The two people in front of him were a typical example. Fu Yao sneered and said, "Lingwen Shenjuan said that I can come willingly, so why should I scram?" The word willingly, when said with this expression, really wasn't convincing. Xia Lian said, "Let me confirm. Did you really come willingly? If you're not willing, then don't force yourself." The two of them replied, "I came willingly." Looking at those two dejected faces, Xia Lian thought to himself, "What you two actually want to say is I'm committing suicide, right?" In short, Xia Lian said, "Let's talk about proper business first. You two already know what we came to the north for this time, so I won't start from the beginning." The two of them replied, "I don't know." Xia Lian had no choice but to take out a scroll and say, "Then I'll tell you from the beginning." It was said that many years ago, there was a newlywed couple in Mount Yujun. This newlywed couple loved each other very much. The groom waited for the wedding procession to arrive, but after waiting for a long time, he still didn't see the bride arrive. The groom became anxious and went to look for the bride's maiden family. In the end, his father-in-law and mother-in-law told him that the bride had already left. The two families reported to the authorities and searched everywhere, but they still couldn't find the bride. Even if she was eaten by fierce beasts in the mountains, at the very least, she would still have an arm or a leg or something. How could she just disappear into thin air? Thus, it was inevitable that some people suspected that the bride herself wasn't willing to marry and had colluded with the wedding procession to run away. Who knew that after a few years, another newlywed couple would get married, and the nightmare would repeat itself?